During the 2022 midterm elections, voters in Vermont, Tennessee, Oregon, Alabama, and Louisiana decided whether or not to change their state constitutions to prohibit slavery and involuntary servitude as punishment for a crime. That's because when the 13th Amendment abolished slavery for all Americans except for people who are incarcerated, many states followed suit. But some are reevaluating that decision.
Undoubtedly, this is a good big step.
Claudia Flores is a human rights professor at Yale Law School and the co author of a recent ACLU report on incarcerated workers.
I think there's been some time that a lot of people have had discomfort with this idea that we have a constitutional prohibition against all forms of slavery, including involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, forced labor, but that we exclude a pretty large population within the United States. It's 1.2 million incarcerated people in the U.S. And counting. And they are in a position where they can be forced to work, and it's by the state.
Tennessee State Senator Ramesh Akbari proposed the amendments to her state's constitution.
When you think about states across the South, particularly like Tennessee, Georgia, Mississippi, these were kind of strongholds during the Civil War where slavery existed until the end of the Civil War. Then immediately you saw post Reconstruction this kind of convict leasing that almost reinstituted slavery, destroyed families and communities that were really trying to thrive post, slavery, post Civil War.
It's really embarrassing, actually, that for so long we've had this exclusion to involuntary servitude in so many of our state constitutions and in the federal constitution. And it's really a leftover of a time, in the U.S. that really heavily relied on a racialized system of exploitative labor.
Voters in Tennessee, Alabama, Oregon, and Vermont voted to amend their state constitutions. Louisiana did not. But what do terms like involuntary servitude, slavery, and forced labor mean and look like when you're incarcerated?
Slavery is when you purchase someone for whatever purposes, a human being. Involuntary servitude is when you compel labor through usually physical abuse, physical restraint, or some form of coercion. But right now, when we're talking about constitutional involuntary servitude, it would require either sort of physical threats, physical restraint, or some kind of threats or coercion that really are quite serious, that a reasonable person would feel like they had no choice but to do the labor. But you can see how in a prison context, maybe that's not that hard, right? Because, when you eat is decided by your employer. And these decisions are really being made by the wardens, by the management of the prisons without really any sort of oversight. So I think coercion, when someone is in complete control of your surroundings in your life, has to mean something different.
You're not getting paid for involuntary servitude and slavery. It's something that's enshrined in constitutions across the country for those who are incarcerated as a form of punishment. Forced labor, you are getting paid. They're not getting paid enough. And certainly that's another issue that needs to be tackled, but there is some payment provided.
The thing that's really unique about prison labor is that the employer is also the jailer, and the employer has complete control over every aspect of an incarcerated person's life. And so there are a lot of ways in which you can compel someone to labor without maybe really rising to the level of what we would traditionally think of as coercion. So I think it's going to really be a matter of courts understanding that coercion needs to be defined in the prison context. And then I think these changes to state constitutions could really make a difference in terms of creating a system, and there are people in prisons who want to labor. So creating a system in which people are compensated, in which people have proper conditions, they're safe, they receive the tools that they need and the training that they need, and maybe even skills that will help them when they are released.
Akbari acknowledges that amending the language in the state constitution won't change much for incarcerated people on its own.
Passing the amendment is not going to have a direct effect, but it begins a conversation, and I think it humanizes the experience of those who are incarcerated. They deserve to be paid a fair wage.
According to research by the ACLU, incarcerated people make on average between 13 and 52 cents per hour. Increasing wages for prison workers and the effect it could have on state budgets is a complicated sticking point. In June, California rejected proposed amendments to its state constitution after learning that it would cost an estimated $1.5 billion per year to pay prison workers minimum wage. According to the ACLU report, incarcerated workers nationwide also produce more than $2 billion a year in goods and commodities. But in states like Tennessee, where voters cast ballots to amend their state constitutions, legislators and taxpayers have to grapple with just how financially dependent they are on prison labor.
I think that navigating the budget question is going to be the issue. I think fundamentally people believe that if you're paid, if you work, you should be paid. I think the question is, how can the state afford it? Certainly, California has a much larger prison population than we do. However, in the last couple of years, Tennessee's cost of incarceration has exceeded $1 billion. So that really is a challenge. I don't know that we have an answer for that, but certainly it's something that we have to begin the discussions around.
The really tricky part here is that a lot of prison labor is actually dedicated to maintaining the prison itself. And so this is really a huge kind of economic issue for the state. There's $9 billion worth of money that that laborers within prisons are producing essentially in terms of maintenance. So that's just a lot of money, and it's a lot of money for states. I think it'll vary from state to state how much they are reliant on prison labor to maintain their state incarceration system. But a number of state officials have noted this as a concern, and it's also a reason that a lot of government agencies that are involved in incarceration have opposed it.
Pay disparity for those who are incarcerated really needs to be addressed through legislation and also allocations in our budget. So it's really going to take those from both sides of the aisle having some buy-in and supporting the issue.
Making meaningful changes to pay disparities and working conditions for incarcerated people will be an uphill battle. But in Tennessee and other states across the country, Senator Akberry says these amendments are just the beginning.
The legislature resumes in January, and that's when I plan to file a bill that will try and address this in a meaningful way. I think this is the beginning of the process, but certainly the constitutional amendment, in my mind, is a spark that's going to light the fire to continue to have these discussions.
And so the U.S. really has an opportunity here to be a leader and to think about a prison labor system that could be responsive to the things we say we want to do. If we want individuals to leave with skills and with the ability to really sort of restart their lives, there are ways to have a prison labor system that would accomplish that. And if we need to reallocate where our expenses come from and how we think about the system of incarceration, I think that is what it is, and it's long overdue.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Nicole Ellis.